Hello and welcome to the Impactful Conversations podcast with me, Dr. Glenn Wallace, and my very good friend and co-host, Nejmi Alexander. Nejmi, hi.
Hi and welcome. Welcome to Impactful Conversations. This season, we're going to be exploring how to set up for success across the year. And today's topic is thinking about that from a personal standpoint. So how to set up for personal success in 2025. The impacts that you can expect from this episode is to think about, what to focus on and what to avoid when it comes to really effective goal setting, and also how to sustain yourself on the journey towards those outcomes that you set out for yourself, your leadership, your team, etc. So welcome. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. And we had a little chat before recording, and you clearly had a lovely time with the family, which is excellent. But I've got a question for you linked to today's topic. Are you a New Year's resolution setter or not?
I am not a New Year's resolution setter. Probably is I'm committing some kind of crime as a coach. And not be as goal oriented or outcome oriented across the year as maybe one might expect. But no, I actually stopped setting goals for the year and instead kind of shifted a little bit more towards like intentions, like what I wanted to have more of in the year, or what I've expected more of from myself, more like to be fitter or healthier or whatever it might be, and then work back from those intentions as to, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of like behavioral or habitual shifts that I might need to put some focus in. So I actually bypass a little bit the kind of classic smart goal oriented, I want to achieve X by Y. Which, as I say, might be sacrilege from
But you've got a process. You've got a process, and I'm not a fan of SMART goals. I think there's several reasons why that's not necessarily a brilliant framework. But you've got your own version of that, right? Which is to set intentions, but you're then still setting actions against the intentions, I would guess, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it's important to hold yourself to account around like progress and difference, I think. Right. How about yourself? Are you a New Year's resolutions kind of guy?
Yeah, I probably joined according to, I think it's Oscarson and colleagues who've done some really interesting research around New Year's resolvers, I think they're called. I think the technical term is a New Year's resolver. Which is interesting. Okay. So we'll start using that bit of jargon, shall we? Only useful for one period of the year. I am and always have been, and like a lot of those 55% of the sort of Northern European and American populations apparently who set New Year's resolutions, I do, and they are often in the topics and areas that apparently most New Year's resolvers set their targets around: health, fitness particularly, but that's to be honest, Nejmi, that's part of my routine anyway. I don't necessarily set new goals just because it's the new year. I'm setting those goals across the year anyway. So I've had, because of my sporting background, I've had goals as part of my upbringing, really, and so respond to them pretty well. But I think newer for me are goals around business goals, for example, and then sort of personal goals around personal growth. So some of the more common ones I've done just because that's been part of how I've grown up, but I still do set the other goals as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you mentioned some of that research that you were describing around New Year's resolvers.
Yes.
As there's a few interesting things that came out from that for me around like goal setting and what's important within setting goals that are actually likely to be achieved rather than the classic. Isn't there, I think there's like a day in January where New Year's resolutions tend to fail or tend to not have been successful by. I can't remember what that date was, but some of the research is around like what to focus on within setting goals, I thought was really interesting around the idea of like moving, defining what it is that you want to move towards, and rather than what you want to move away from.
Yeah.
So, for those that are setting, resolutions or goals, that defines, some difference or something that you want to move towards, you're far more likely to be successful in achieving that, rather than the opposite, like avoidance of, like, I don't know, giving up smoking or whatever it might be. When people are trying to eliminate behaviors, they have a far less success, far lower success rate.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting. Do you tend to focus on move towards goals in your resolutions?
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think we can talk about, some of the tactics and approaches that we're going to offer the listeners, because there are proven ways of setting goals and ambition and intentions that are more effective. As you say, one of them might be that you set more moving towards goals rather than away from goals. I think the thing that we want to try and do in this episode is help people avoid the image that went straight through my head as you were talking about that day in January. Is, gyms are really busy for the first week or two. For goodness sake, don't try and get into a private or public gym between January the 1st and about January the 12th. After that, you're fine, because everybody's New Year's resolutions has dropped off a cliff. So but just don't do it in that first couple of weeks. And whilst we are talking about setting goals for personal success, that's in order to translate to being effective in the world of business, right? And the organizational life that leaders that are our audience are living. So I think what we're trying to avoid is that second week in January dip, and helping people create goals both personally and over the season within an organizational context, that they will have much more chance of, being successful with. So yeah, it's that's what we're trying to help you avoid, and trying to help you set off on the path to success. One of the things I would say, I don't know if you do any of this, Nejmi, which is, before I set goals for going forward, one of the things I will do is spend time, not navel gazing, but certainly reflecting on the period, whatever period that is, that's just gone. Partly because I think we don't spend enough time doing that. Partly we can learn a lot from doing that. And also it makes setting meaningful and sensible goals going forward more likely than if you're sort of dragging them out of sort of thin air and without any context. Does that sound, do you do any of that yourself?
Definitely. I think it's critical.
All right.
I think it's critical from both from a personal standpoint and from a professional standpoint too. So my wife and I typically on New Year's Eve, we just did one this New Year's Eve too, we sit and have a little bit of a ritual, a bit of a ceremony, where we spend a little bit of time, like, individually looking back on the year that's been, what we're proud of, what challenges we've faced or what we've overcome, and kind of reflecting on, like, 2 or 3 key questions, before then coming back together and kind of sharing that, and then using that as the basis to inform, okay, well, what's the difference? Like, what do we want to focus on over the next year that's going to help us to, like, live and be as aligned as possible in what we're working towards from a personal life perspective. I find that's really powerful. It's really powerful to have, like, rituals like that, and I think translating that into a professional setting, that might be like on a quarterly basis, like looking back over the successes of the team, like how close you've come to delivering on the outcomes, or your strategic objectives, or whatever it might be. Where the challenges have laid, and therefore using that as a moment in time, a rhythm, that whereby you can use the insight and make sure that you're not missing some of the clues from what's past, to really inform. What you want to focus on, or what goals you have over the coming period, and ensuring that that's aligned, that it feels like that's actually closer to the true reality, because obviously when we're setting goals that are too far away from our identity or our desired outcomes, or which I'm sure we'll get into more of the detail around, then we're not setting ourselves up for success.
But I think the mere fact that you have consciously created the space to do that, if listeners to this episode did nothing more, that would be gold dust right there, because I think it's not easy, and you've done it very consciously. I think that's really important, both for, again, personal and particularly professional. And I only say particularly professional because I think the time squeeze, is often even greater in a organizational context, and finding the time to do what feels like, either, personal backslapping, as congratulating yourself, and or being overly critical of yourself and getting too down on yourself for time to do. It's not about that. It's just the fact that you've reflected objectively in order to plan goals and ways forward more effectively, as you've done. I think is a brilliant strategy. I don't do that. My wife and I don't do that, but we may well do that next year. It's only 12 months to go until I get a chance to practice it. But this is one of the things. One of our colleagues, David Pilbeam, who does a lot of the research for this program and this show, talks about all the time, is you can set reset at any point, can't you? You don't have to wait for, we have a ritual of it being the start of the new year, but again, whether it's personal or professional, you can set reset and decide to start again at any stage, which I think is really liberating, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I also that I always think about like the changing of the seasons, right? Like we witness moments in time. I know, like New Year's is like psychologically, it's like the number has changed at the end of the date that we see on our laptops on a daily basis. So like that's a big change. But actually, you witness change all the time, and so exactly as you say, like reset or change of season, we can put moments in time around this, like anytime, but there are like cues that around where that might be useful. Not only is that beneficial to help inform like a reset or goal setting really effectively, but I think also it comes back to this idea around purpose. Like when we set goals that are aligned, that feel purposeful, they're far more likely to be achieved, and being able to do the introspection will again provide is far more effective in my experience to provide clues around like what does feel purposeful as you move forward. So I feel like there's a level of introspection that is useful in helping us to really connect with and define like meaningful and purposeful goals, and that I think is relevant in any context, whether it's personal or professional. If you're looking ahead to the next year, thinking about how are we gonna what do I want to achieve for myself, or what do I want my team to achieve, actually connecting that to something that feels purposeful, that you've done the work to identify your own purpose within that, I think is a really, really useful like practice.
I agree with you, and there's research to back that claim up about the importance of purpose, and not just in the better, in inverted commas, setting of goals, but certainly in your ability to hold on to the effort required over an extended period of time to fulfill them. I think it can be quite difficult. I don't know if you'd agree, but certainly working with leaders as we do, I think sometimes there's aligning purposes, personal purpose and the organizational purpose can at least on the surface feel quite different if there's a mismatch between those two things. But it's time well invested, it's trying to find elements of the work that you do that fulfill a personal purpose, because it almost gives you it's bigger than yourself, it's bigger than the goal, it's the thing that will keep you going, particularly when things get tough. So even if you're in an environment where purposes seem at odds or not sufficiently aligned, spending time trying to look for how you might fulfill your personal purpose through the organization, still super powerful way of sort of then translating that back into goals for the business.
Yeah, I find like the idea of purpose and like alignment to the organization's like purpose and mission. Often people can find that quite challenging in my experience, because a mission, the reason why you are in an organization or delivering on, the outcomes for a goal for an organization, it may feel purposeful. It may feel more or less purposeful depending on where you are within the organization, or where you are within your own, team life cycle as to what you're focused on. But at any given point, it's really important, it's incumbent on individuals, leaders within an organization, to do the work to actually think about, well, what is actually purposeful for me, and how does that translate into, motivation, into like my focus, the role that I have to play within delivering on the mission or the strategy within the organization. So actually, again, spending time to clarify, to translate the context to your individual context, like understanding your own, what is it that genuinely does feel purposeful for you, where you are in your phase in your career or your leadership, and in making sure that you're aligning again your goals or your actions around that, will set you up for far greater success in sustaining the effort that's going to be required in order to achieve those goals.
Yeah. I think it's a nice thing to be able to tap into when it feels like the going gets tough. And I think the other thing is, and this would be perhaps a nice bridge into the goal setting piece itself that we wanted to spend a bit of time on, and that is that I think purpose is almost like if you think of it almost like a macro goal, and then the goals that you're trying to achieve sit underneath that. And if you wanted, to think about it in that way, I don't think that's an unhelpful way of thinking about the relationship between what purpose really is and how it provides a sort of North Star, as the phrase goes, to some of the work that you're trying to achieve. So the goals themselves then, so sort of to underpick that, let's maybe highlight 2 or 3 things that we know about goal setting that the evidence would suggest is important. And we hear a lot about, you've mentioned already, SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based, and those figures, those letters rather, that spell SMART. That's easy for me to say. It changed depending on the literature that you use. Big, hairy, audacious goals is another one made famous by Jim Collins in the book that he wrote, I think. But they're just frameworks for goals. They're not telling you about the mechanisms and the way to set goals, particularly around personal growth and development. So what would be 1 or 2 things that you're aware of that recent literature has shared about how to set goals effectively?
Well, one of the elements is around ensuring that the goals that you set are supported by, or that they're more likely to be successful if they're supported with a strong sense of the identity that you want to uphold. And what I mean by that is, it's certainly true for me. Like, if my perception of myself is that I am a man of my word. I'm reliable, and so if I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. And so when I am, and that's just comes down to my own, identity around, self-identity. Yep. So when I am able to define intentions or goals, and I share them with other people, I share my intention, I'm far more likely to feel motivated to navigate towards them, to actually do the work that's going to help me to, overcome some of the hardship, or and exercise some of the willpower that might be required, or keep the energy and the effort sustained to help me to navigate towards them. And so that also relates to some of what the research was talking about from Oscarson as well, around the idea of building a support team. Mm-hmm. So you're far more likely, from the research, again, it describes that for those individuals that have no support around delivering an outcome, have some support around navigating towards it, or have extended support, those that have more support are significantly more successful in maintaining their New Year's resolutions, but as compared to those with less support. Yeah. Right. So actually thinking about establishing goals that are that feel true to you because they, help you to be a version of yourself that you perceive that you want to be or that perceive that you are, and that you enlist the help of others. You share it with other people, and you enlist the help of other people to help you to get there. You will be far more likely to be successful in navigating towards that. Just like for me, one of the most intense moments of my adult life where this came true was when I became a father, and I was again coming back to the sense of identity as like I need to be super healthy and like to as like maintain exercise, maintain my well-being for because it's for more than me now. I need to do that for other people. I need to like sustain, be fit and healthy, and live a long and happy life for my children now. And that I found like was a real kind of shift in mindset. And actually, I thought actually like coming back to the research, like that feels really true for me. So when thinking about how to set goals again effectively, I think really thinking about who is the version of yourself that you want to be, and actually spending some time defining that to then inform what do you need to do in order to be that person.
Yeah, and that links to more research, doesn't it, around the fact that setting intrinsic goals or intrinsically motivated goals are more likely to you are more likely to successfully deliver than extrinsic ones. So you're thinking about that from a health perspective and an internally driven perspective, rather than you're going to win some prize or somebody's going to pay you some money for achieving a certain weight or fitness level or whatever. And I think that's another useful tool and approach to goal setting, which is how do you internalize it to make it something that you want to do. It's not being imposed on you from outside, or you're not looking for extrinsic reward as a result. Sometimes goals feel like they're a bit of both, right? So I think sometimes you can get to a certain, because New Year's is very often one where people set, let's say, weight goals, personal body weight goals. That feels extrinsic, so you're trying to hit a number on a scale, but actually what you're really trying to do is, what you're also trying to do is to grow greater self-confidence, because you've got greater self-confidence around how you feel, the energy that you've got. So that sometimes those goals can feel like they're on two levels. That makes sense. But the more intrinsic bit you can tap into, the more powerful they are. And I think that's linked to the idea of purpose and identity that you've already spoken about. Yeah.
Well, whenever I think of intrinsic motivation again, I come back to Daniel Pink and some of the thinking around from Drive, right? And again, like purpose is one of those factors that helps us to feel intrinsically motivated. So actually, again, doing the work to really think about, well, why am I doing this? What's the actual thing that sits behind this, and validating that, right? Like sniff testing that, because often we have ideas, preconceived notions of like, I want to be, this version, or I want to focus on, X goal. But actually, unless we've done the work to really like deeply connect with the why that sits behind it. Unsurprisingly, when we get to the 21st of January or whatever it might be, when the going gets tough, we can lose sight of maintaining that, unless we have other tools, other things that keep us honest around our pursuit of those goals. What other tools or things do you think can keep us honest?
One of the debates that I hear quite a lot around the goal setting is, do you have a single point on the horizon that you're aiming for, or do you have a little bit more flexibility in relation to that? So you've got a range of things. So your intent model would line up nicely against the range of arrival point, destination points. versus a single point. I'll give you an example. So when I was both an international judo player myself, so I was on the British team, but also when I then did, I was the sports psychologist for the junior modern pentathlon team for a while. We used this approach really successfully, which was, instead of saying, let's take one of the disciplines, let's say in the modern pentathlon. So one of the disciplines is pistol shooting, and maximum score of 60, and somebody could set a target of 58, let's say. Well, you're either going to succeed or fail, so it's really binary. You either get to 58 or you don't over the season, and that's your target. Whereas what you could say is, over the course of the season, 57 will be an acceptable target, 58 is my ideal target, and my dream goal is to hit 59. So you've given yourself this range to work within, and then just really focusing on the process to get you to those goals. And because on any given day, something could go wrong if you've got a single point in time, and you could consider it a failure, when actually in the context, it might have been a really good result or really good performance. But because you've only given yourself that single measure by which you define success or failure, it's too binary to be useful. So, organizations who set a sales goal, for example, might set a sales goal that is, 2 million by the end of the year. And you go, well, we've either succeeded or we failed, or we've got this range, and the macroeconomics are going to affect whether we make the sales or not, and that's not in our control. But all of the things that we can do, we will do. But we'll say it'll be between 1.75 million and 2.5, and there's a range. So we've taken into account some of the things we can't control. And so I think that can be a really helpful, it's not so wide. You'll notice that those ranges aren't so wide that you can sort of slack off. It's just being mindful of the things that might happen. Let's put that range in place. And I've found, both personally at that kind of sporting level that I was competing at, but certainly with the modern pentathletes that we work with, they found it really helpful. Quite what's the right word? Quite a relief in some ways, because all of a sudden you haven't got to go from this single point of success or failure. You can still look at good performances and judge it that way. Don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's true in a number of ways. I guess, again, coming back to the New Year's resolution sort of frame of reference, like, people, I guess it can be demotivating. People can tend to, give up if at the first sign of, not being on the path to success, you can drop your level of motivation around the effort of sustaining it. Whereas actually, if you have a range of what determines success, so it's not just, I need to do X for 31 days consistently, or, over like 100% success rate over the next 3 months, of whatever it might be. But actually, if there's wiggle room to fall short a little bit, but you're still moving towards the overall outcome, and like measuring success as whether you've kind of arrived at said outcome over a period of time, I think that really works for me. I think especially at this stage of the year, when again, coming back to that kind of intention model that I described, like giving yourself a range of success, I think is motivating. It allows you for the occasional moment of falling short, but still being able to like drive towards a success, not giving up because you've fallen short on the first hurdle.
Well, clearly anybody that fails to set a goal has no willpower, or to achieve a goal has no willpower, Nejmi. That's clearly what the evidence doesn't suggest, actually. It's very clear on willpower, because it's quite a... I think many of us were brought up on the idea that if you set a goal, as long as you try hard enough, and you will eventually get there. And I do think things like consistency is a really important factor to goal achievement, right? Goal attainment. There is no doubt that there's a lovely phrase, I'm sure you've heard it in the work that you do, but it was relatively new to me a couple of years back. People significantly overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what they can achieve in 5.
Yeah.
And I think that is speaking centrally to this idea of consistency. And whilst you may not see, it might feel like you're putting all this effort into, a very large dark hole that doesn't seem to make any difference to what you're doing. Yeah, maybe for a year, maybe for two, but with as long as the effort is applied into the right places and it's applied smartly, you will see change. It just may not come as quickly as you expect or hope. So consistency is an important part of goal attainment, but we're often told that it's willpower and grit, and I think the problem is that doesn't recognize that willpower is a limited supply. It's not an endless. We don't have endless supplies of it, and there's some research that sort of talks about it as like a muscle. It gets fatigued, like a muscle would get fatigued if you overuse it in the gym. And I think that's quite a nice metaphor to hold on to for leaders who are very busy and will drag themselves to the desk or drag themselves to the next team meeting because they're trying to demonstrate willpower, not recognizing that the willpower is just depleted.
Yeah, it's a really important sort of mindset to challenge, I think, actually, what you just described there, Glenn. Because you're right. I think there can be an idea that some people have more or less willpower. And actually, it can rely heavily on your capability around willpower in order to achieve certain outcomes. So if you're setting out your goals for the team or for the year, we're going to do it by sheer force of will. And that's going to help us that's our competitive advantage. That's what's going to help us to get to X, outcome. Whereas actually the research demonstrates that that's not a solid strategy to employ in attainment for goals. So it's from this paper called Willpower Without Effort by Ainley, where they're talking about, again, some of the characteristics around willpower that actually it's, if we're thinking about goals that we want to achieve over the year to come, then it's really important to be able to not just rely on sheer force of will, because actually willpower will feel like exerting willpower will be easier or more automatic in a context where we've already done the work to ensure that the goal is genuinely desirable for our outcomes, right? And so if we can select goals that do feel genuinely aligned with the other ideas that we've talked about, our identity or what it is that we like our purpose, so we can make an emotional connection to that, then we won't have to rely on this finite resource of willpower, and the actual desire, the effort that's involved in getting there will feel relatively less than if those things aren't aligned. And we do have to rely on willpower because, as you say, it's a finite resource. Not only is that disadvantageous to rely on, but also all of the effort that goes into driving something when you are relying on willpower is exertion. It is still effort that is spent, right? And that effort could be invested into any number of things that if you had kind of made a slightly different selection process around what it is you're focusing on and why. And so there's a big opportunity cost in relying on willpower, I think. And so it's important to challenge ourselves on that. If we do identify with I achieve my goals because I just have a strong sense of willpower. Actually, is there opportunity in that to achieve even more by having not having to rely on that resource
and not beat yourself up if you feel that you haven't applied enough willpower, which that's a pretty common narrative that we hear. I think we're often brought up on that narrative that you're just not trying hard enough, or you're not, and whilst that is clearly it's true in some contexts, it's not true in every. And I think you see people who burn out to some extent in an organizational context. I wonder how much of that is because people are not aware that they are just empty. they're just running on empty, and yet they feel this sort of be strong driver, and well, if I can just grit my teeth and get through it, it'll all be fine, and I need to show more willpower. And you sort of think actually what you need is a week off and stop, recharge and go again. But you've depleted the willpower that you had. And I think it's a bit similar in some ways to the idea of motivation, which they're linked, I think. But it's we've talked about this idea of intrinsic motivation or intrinsic goals that drive intrinsic motivation or extrinsically motivated reward and things like that. And I think that's pretty well researched. You mentioned earlier on this idea of towards and away from motivation. Are you setting goals that you're motivated towards something versus being motivated away from something? They're both powerful, but there's evidence to suggest that where you're setting goals that are motivating you towards something, you're more likely to sustainably succeed at. I think they're kind of related topics, but different. But in order to deliver your goals or succeed at your goals, you need some spark, don't you? You need some spark of motivation. Otherwise, why would you set it, right? So, clear sense of purpose, clear sense of an outcome that I want, and I feel driven to achieve it. Great. And aligning those things, as you talked about, is really key. If you can then think about how might you manipulate motivation, then I think you're onto a bit of a winner. And what I mean by that are things like, can you set a really clear vision for the end that is compelling? Because actually, if you build a really rich picture of what it will be like when you arrive, that's often enough for people to go, I want to do that. Or yes, that's what I'm chasing. It could be something like a picture board where you go through magazines and articles in the paper. Does anybody read actual physical papers in magazines anymore? But you know what I mean. And clip out things that are, that's how I want to look, or that's what I want my life to be like, and actually put a picture board together. Sounds a bit and a bit sort of West Coasty, but it's really, really powerful because you're bringing that reality closer to you. You don't have to do it that way. You can do visual imagery on that, and the power of that is quite incredible. I can attest to that. So I think that's sort of ways of manipulating motivation, if that's the right way of putting it, I think can be super powerful in helping you achieve your goal.
Yeah, I really like that. Like, I think visualization can feel a little bit tricky, I think, at times. I certainly, when I first kind of discovered it, I found it quite difficult to do in order to kind of really connect with what this kind of envisioning of the endpoint or the future could hold. But I guess, as with all things, right, with a bit of practice, actually it starts to become more tangible. And also that we've got different, like, so some people might be a bit more like a visual like learner, or more like have more of a visual orientation versus some of the other senses, right? And actually it might be that by verbally sharing some of the ideas that you are envisioning, or writing down, it might feel a bit more more you, in any instance, whichever kind of aesthetic is more you, but taking the time to actually do that work, to put yourself at an endpoint in the future and start to make it real and tangible. And also, I think, so coming back to a point that we talked about a little bit earlier, sharing it with other people, starts to help it to feel a little bit more real. And in so doing, you can start to tap into that as a source of motivation, right? Like wanting to make that vision true. I think that's a big part of why that kind of ritual that I shared that we do with my wife is to actually make it to build a bit more like accountability, I guess, around making those ideas true and tangible, and in so doing, again, helping to connect to a sense of motivation to do it, because yeah, sometimes the going might get tough, you might get distracted, and you've got all of these other things, and that comes true in leadership too, right? Like you might find yourself firefighting often, or like drawn into a more tactical operational focus, which is distracting from the strategic goals that you had, and in so doing, that kind of focus might move you further away from the intent that you set out or the goals that you set out.
Yeah.
But actually by having done something tangible or physical, whether it's like creating your mood board or picture board, or writing down that what the intent would be at the end of X period of time, that gives you something to come back to and to reconnect with, to help overcome some of the challenges or the moments where like you might have to rely on willpower, or you might feel more demotivated, or whatever it might be. So I think it is a really important practice that you just described.
You've made lots of really good points there, but you're absolutely correct to distinguish between sort of people's preferences, whether I'm visual, I prefer visual and or auditory, or building a mood board. You're absolutely right. Do whatever works for you. But the key here is, can you future pace a vision of that end state so that it's engaging? But I think then the key, another tool to manipulate motivation, if I can put it that way, not a phrase I'm familiar with, I'm sort of made it up on the fly, but would be, for example, having milestones along the way that you stop at as you pass through them, and you recognize that you are passing through a gateway to the next level of performance or the next part of the goal. Because I think it's way too easy. High performers do this. I don't know, you would recognize this, and being a high performer, you may well even fall into this little trap too, which is that just about the time that we're coming towards achieving a goal that we'd set, many high performers will just reset the bar, and they'll just raise it. And that is very much the modus operandi of high performers. So there's nothing wrong with it in itself. But what those high performers then forget to do, I think, or neglect to do, is as they pass through what was their old goal, the level that they were aiming for in the first place, they don't recognize that. They don't take a moment. They don't do the thing that you and your wife do at the end of the year, which is reflect on everything that we've achieved over the year. And so therefore you don't get the energy from, and the greater self-confidence that might come from, acknowledging what you've achieved, albeit that you're now chasing a higher level goal. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, and you've just hit on a really important point. So any of our listeners, if this feels true for you, challenge yourself around that. Try not to avoid or neglect the acknowledgement moment, because it is important to do that. But also crucially, if you have a team that you're responsible for, and that's a practice that you tend to do, other people in that team might not appreciate that habit quite as much as you do as a motivating factor, right? It's really important to pause and acknowledge and see how far you've come, and acknowledge everybody's effort in contributing towards that. I've seen exactly what you described. I've probably fallen into that trap myself, especially if you're in a fast-paced organization. If you set goals quarter to quarter, by the end of the quarter, you're probably setting out what you're looking to achieve for the next quarter. And so the next interaction that you have with the team is more around, okay, here's what we're going to do next. But actually, without having those moments to kind of pause and acknowledge and recognize, that will play its part in people feeling like it's never ending, right? Like that could be demotivating. Whereas actually, it is really important to stop and acknowledge that from your own perspective, but also for the benefit of your the folks that are in your team.
Yeah, really cool. Well, look, we've covered a lot of ground as always, and we've looked at why we might set goals, both in the personal context of new year, but you don't forget that you can set that new year in inverted commas at any stage, and there's also then how do you structure goals in a way that you've got more chance of achieving them, and then how do you operate, if you like, in a way that helps you achieve these clearer goals, or these more likely to be achieved goals. So I think there's been an awful lot there, right, to cover off. Have you got one or two sort of key takeaways for yourself that you would add?
I've got loads, Glenn. I've got 4, 5, or 6. Just to recap on what I've taken from that. So when it came to that first impact around like what to focus on and what to avoid when it comes to effective goal setting, talked a little bit about thinking about your identity, linking your identity, sense of identity to those goals, and also thinking about intrinsic goals or goals that you're intrinsically motivated towards achieving as distinct, as well as extrinsic goals, and sometimes ensuring that they're linked, but crucially making sure that you're clear on the intrinsic motivation to achieve them. And then in terms of practices that help us to sustain ourselves, I really loved the experience that you were talking about from the pistol shooting team, around really focusing. I made a note on a couple of things, focusing on inputs, so focusing on the process, and making sure that you're staying honest to putting everything that you can into achieving those outcomes, but really focusing on what is in your control. But then the other element around that is setting a range around what success looks like. Don't make it binary, so that you at the first moment where that where you maybe fall short a little bit, that doesn't mean lack of success. That actually success is a process, and you're working towards that. And then envisioning, making a vision, or like future stepping, finding a way in which you can get really clear on what the end point is for your goal, and making it real and tangible, and using that as a motivating factor. And then crucially recognizing, acknowledging as you're passing through milestones towards achieving it, and acknowledging it for yourself and acknowledging it for your team as well. Bags of value there to go and employ.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, look, and hopefully listeners will have taken a lot from it. It's a huge topic, and what we really wanted to do in this episode was to set you up as leaders in a business to lead even more successfully. And some of that is going to come through you developing yourself, developing really good habits, setting yourself effective goals that you can, more certainly achieve, in order that you grow. And in your growth, you are able to perform more effectively, both in work, but in life in general. And I think if you are able to take some of the things that we've talked about over this very full episode, you'll be well on the way to doing that, and not just at New Year, but whenever you decide to reset the clock. So
absolutely,
we want you to go away and try things, and that's the purpose of Impactful Conversations. It's not just that we are having impactful conversations as part of the podcast, it's that we want you to go away and be impacted by whatever you've taken from it, and then share those with us in an anonymized form, so that we might be able to then share them with the other listeners on future podcasts.
That's it. Send us your impacts. And also, that's coming back to one of the ideas around maintaining accountability for the things that we do. Use us as an accountability, for accountability. Go forth, apply your impacts, and send us how those go.
Good stuff. Well, until the next time, Nejmi, great conversation as always. Really enjoyed it, sir. Thank you very much. Best of luck for 2025. We should both be set up for success after this session, surely.
Looking forward to a successful year.
Awesome. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks,
take care. Cheers.